Good morning, everyone. So wonderful to be back with you on this Lord's Day morning. We are continuing our study titled Unlocking the Book of Revelation. We are in the final 7 of Revelation. We divide into 7 groups of 7. This is the final victory of Christ, who is the perfect 7, and his saints, which will go from Revelation 19 through the end of the book. Now, last week, we celebrated the fall of Babylon, which we identified as the capital city of Rome, which the Roman Empire was the ruling empire at this time. Christ defeated the beast, which we identified as the Roman emperor, the government of Rome, who was demanding that citizens worship him as a god, including Christians, and the false prophet that we identified as the Concilia, who were the priests of the pagan Roman religious system who made Christians worship the emperor. And they have fallen. They have been defeated, and a celebration has taken place. We have come to the hardest chapter of the hardest book of the Bible. So buckle up. Of this chapter, G.B. Caird, who is not associated with us, but he had a commentary, and he says, "We come now to a passage which has been the paradise of cranks and fanatics." And the actual message of this chapter is actually not difficult to understand. What enemy does God have left to defeat? If the Roman Empire and the government and their religious system has been defeated, who's left? Satan, that old serpent, the dragon, the one who gave the beast his power, the one who will oppose us till the end of time, the tempter, the accuser. He will suffer his final defeat. Christ and his people are victorious. That is the theme of Revelation 20. But, as usual, the details can be quite difficult. We probably get caught up the most in this chapter on the concept of time. It's not so much about time that's under consideration in this chapter, but the defeat of, to use a video game term for those that are familiar, the final boss, Satan. The purpose of the book is victory against the enemy of God and his church. We've dealt with the smaller enemies, who were certainly powerful, but we need to beat the final enemy, which is Satan. Some keys we're going to use to unlock this most difficult chapter, perhaps, in the Bible. Key number 2 here, Revelation identifies a spiritual kingdom, not a physical kingdom yet to come. 3, Revelation is a symbolic book. The entire book has been filled with figurative language. We must resist making it literal here. We'll talk more about that. Key number 4, Revelation was written to be understood and should be taken in its entirety. I'm about to show you that in just a second, but we get bogged down the details sometime and we miss the point. Key number 6, Revelation does identify the dragon for us, which will be the key of this chapter. Key number 8, Revelation reveals that God is in control. And key number 9, Revelation's purpose was to comfort persecuted Christians in the first century and throughout all time who suffer persecutions and trials. So we're going to do something different for chapter 20. I have studied it and studied it and studied it some more. And you look at people that have studied it and commentaries on it, and you'll get 1,000 different views at it. But yet again, the message of this chapter is so easy to understand. So what I'd like to do is actually do the 35,000-foot view first. I'm going to do it with pictures here for you, and I just want you to follow along and you see if it's very hard to understand this chapter. It begins with Satan being bound by an angel from heaven, which limited his power on the earth against the church. He is bound and put in a bottomless pit, put in there for 1,000 years, it says. The faithful martyrs, those who do not join the forces of Satan, are taken care of and exalted with Christ. Satan, though, will continue to marshal his earthly forces against the church. He will use everything he can to attack spiritual Jerusalem, the church. but the Lord himself will protect the church and destroy Satan's forces. Matter of fact, Satan has already been defeated, and he will not be able to change that. And at the final judgment, Satan will be turned into hell, and all will be judged, and those that worship the beast and followed Satan will be turned into hell with them. That's it. That's not that hard to understand, is it? It's not that hard to understand. It's actually one of the most simple chapters in the entire book, one of the most simple in the entire Bible when you put it that way, is it not? That's a pretty simple message. But like I said, the details are perhaps the hardest in the book. We'll give them our level best this morning. I've told you many times. I will tell you there's going to be mistakes on the details as we go through, but the message in the book is clear. The message is clear in the book. So we'll give our level best, and then we'll tie it back to our overall message. So let's start here in Revelation 20, verses 1 through 3, Satan bound for 1,000 years. We're going to read verses 1 and 2 first. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and we're going to answer those questions. Is this a literal dragon? No. Matter of fact, it tells us exactly who the dragon is. The dragon is Satan. Now, a dragon is fearsome. A dragon is powerful. It's not even real, right? But it's even a mythical creature to show Satan's fearsomeness and power, right? Does the angel have a literal chain in his hands? No. What good would a literal chain do for a spiritual being like Satan? It is a symbol of something binding Satan. Could be an allusion to Isaiah 24. Here's verses 1 and 2 there. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will punish on high the host of exalted ones, and on the earth the kings of the earth. They will be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and will be shut up in the prison. After many days they will be punished. That is eerily similar to what we're going to see here in Revelation chapter 20. Is it a literal bottomless pit on the earth? Well, no. If you think about that, there's no such thing as a bottomless pit. It would require a hole that went all the way through the earth, and then you would have something else, right? It represents a sinister place where evil forces reside. Do you remember in Revelation 9, it was out of this pit that the locust creatures came out, some evil forces there. In Revelation 11:7 and 17:8, the beast ascended from the pit. So when you hear that term in Revelation, you get the idea that this is a place where not nice things reside, right? Now, the word literally means abyss. The same Greek word is in Luke 8:3. You might recall the demons there, Jesus was going to cast them out. And they said, don't cast us into the abyss, this pit, before it's our time. And of course, you remember where Jesus cast them instead, do you not? Into the herd of swine. So what were those demons? Where were they not wanting to go? Well, there, it's the waiting place of torment before Judgment Day. You know, at that time, they were allowed to go around the earth and possess people. Not allowed to do it anymore. We're not on that lesson, but it's the same place the rich man was sent to in Luke 16. So that's where it was there. In this vision, probably a little more general, but just a sinister place of evil. I mean, it's where bad things go and bad things are. Does the angel have a literal key? No. Why would you need a literal key for this spiritual place? A key represents what? An unlocking authority, right? If you have the keys to my house, I give them to you. I'll give you the authority to get in my house, right? If I give you the keys to my car, I'll give you the authority to drive my car. An angel opened the pit in chapter 9 to unleash evil on Rome. Now an angel has authority to lock Satan in it. And it really comes to key number 8, which is the whole focus of this chapter, really hitting it hard. Revelation reveals that God is in control. And he's not just in control over earthly kingdoms, and pagan religions, but our greatest and most powerful enemy, Satan himself, has to answer to God. And God himself doesn't have to deal with him. He can send an angel, and an angel can do it. Peter did have the keys to the kingdom, which means he unlocked the doors of the church there in Pentecost with the first gospel sermon. Is it a literal binding? Like, is Satan literally put in chains and stuck in chains? No. A binding represents a restraining of Satan's power on the earth. If I bind you, it does not take away your ability to do anything. Matter of fact, the same words used of Paul being bound, but Paul could still talk and do different things, but there is a limit of what you can do if you're bound. Now, as a matter of fact, there is another mentioning of the binding of Satan, and our Lord mentions it. So there's a question comes up about him casting out demons. You might remember they accused him of casting out demons by the power of Satan. And here was Jesus' reply in Matthew 12. But if I cast out demons by the Spirit of God, surely the kingdom of God has come upon you. So Jesus said these miracles, prove that I am who I say I am. And he says, how can one enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man? Then he will plunder his house. What Jesus was saying is, as I cast out demons, I am taking away some of Satan's power, right? These demons are possessing someone. That's a power Satan had at this time. When Jesus casts them out, well, his power is reduced. He's bound in some way, right? Yeah, Beelzebub, which it's another word they had for probably the chief of the demons, probably another word they had for Satan. In Luke 10, he sent the 70 out, and it says they returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. And yes, we think Satan was probably originally an angel that chose to sin against God and got kicked out of heaven. But the notion here is that Jesus is reducing his power, because they're talking about, hey, we can cast out demons. And what Jesus is saying is, yeah, I'm taking away his power. And now I'm giving you the ability to do that. Just before his death in John 12:31, Jesus said, now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. Remember in Revelation 12, the visions there, Satan had a war in heaven and was cast down, and that was after Christ's ascension. And you can see this in a lot of other verses I've got in my notes. But the idea is binding Satan is limiting his power. But I got to stress this, it doesn't liquidate it. It limits his power, but it doesn't liquidate it. We know from the New Testament he's still a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Okay? Now, matter of fact, verse 3 is going to tell us exactly what John is talking about in Satan's power being limited here. But we will look at that in a minute. We'll come back to it. So, limiting Satan's power on the earth. So, is it a literal 1,000 years? I want you to answer that question. No. And it is strange to me that folks will understand that it's not a literal dragon, and it's not a literal pit, and it's not a literal chain, and it's not a literal key, but then they get to the 1,000 years, and all of a sudden, nope, that is a real 1,000 years. Well, let's take a look at it. There are many views on the 1,000 years, only one of which makes them literal. So that is the notion that, we'll call it view number one, that the 1,000 years is a literal millennium. Millennium, 1,000 years. This view, held by premillennialists, takes the position that this and much of the book is literal, and that it speaks of the end of time yet to come, with Christ reigning literally for 1,000 years on the earth from literal Jerusalem, with a rebuilt temple, renewed animal sacrifices, and it goes on from there. Okay? Now, we are not doing a lesson on premillennialism here today. All we are doing is trying to sort out Revelation 20. But yet again, if every aspect of Revelation 20, 1 and 2 is symbolic, then why would we all of a sudden get to the 1,000 years and say, nope, that's 1,000 real years? Matter of fact, the number itself is clearly a symbol of completeness. So 10 has been one of our numbers of completeness, probably because you and I have 10 fingers and 10 toes. The old joke, that's about as high as I can count, right? But 10's always been an important number to man for that reason. Ultimate completeness then is 10 times 10 times 10 cubed, right? So I think if we get it, 10's complete. Well, cubed is really complete. And that's how the Bible uses it. Listen to Psalm 50 and 10. For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. Does that mean that on the 1,000th and first hill, God does not own those cattle? Well, you know it doesn't. You know it doesn't. You know it means he owns them all. Deuteronomy 7:9. Therefore know that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments. Well, does that mean if he lets the earth stand for 1,001 generations, it's not true? No, it's not. It's just a completeness. That's 4. They think 4, the 4 corners, a few other things. And then 7, perfection or completeness too. Brother Wayne Jackson said, the fact is the numeral 1,000 is found more than 20 times in Revelation, and not once is it employed in a literal sense. So why are we making it literal here? So we're going to take it as figurative, as completeness. Of those that understand the number as representing completeness, there are basically 3 views. Number 1, 1,000 years is the entire 1,000 years is the entire Christian age. So basically from the time Christ came, did his work, and the church was established until the end of time, that is the 1,000 years. Satan bound, saints reigning. This is a very common view. The problem with it is in chapter is that the Christian age will end when what happens? When Christ returns. Well, we're going to get down to verses 7 through 10 here, and it says when the 1,000 years is over, Satan will be released, and he's going to do some stuff. So there's a gap there. So it's kind of, when the Lord returns, that's going to be all she wrote for Satan. So that does not seem, it has some issues. Number 2, the 1,000 years as a whole is just a symbol of completeness. In other words, the years are irrelevant. So here's another quote from Wayne Jackson. In chapter 20, the most likely interpretation of the number is that of completeness. William Milligan observed, the 1,000 years mentioned in the passage express no period of time. They embody an idea, and that idea, whether applied to the subjugation of Satan or to the triumph of the saints, is the idea of completeness or perfection. Drew Leonard, in his commentary, kind of builds on this. He says, the point is that Satan is completely stopped. The saints completely reign. With this in mind, the word completely could be put in the verses to help understand the point. Consider for a moment. So look at verse 2. And you just look for the term 1,000 years, okay? So if we take completeness by itself, it would be, and bound him, instead of for 1,000 years, bound him completely. Okay? If you go to verse 3 and find the term 1,000 years, he should deceive the nations no more till the completion was finished. You look at verse 4. They lived and reigned with Christ completely. Verse 5. But the rest of the dead did not live again until the completeness was finished. Verse 6. Find 1,000 years in there. They shall be priests of God and of Christ and shall reign with him completely. And in verse 7. Now, when the completeness has expired, Satan will be released from his prison. I have seen well-reasoned arguments for this view. I think it has some merit. I favor one slightly different because of this. While the number 1,000 is definitely completeness, it's got the word years attached to it. And I don't know how you get away from years having something to do with time, right? So I get what they're saying. They're saying, wow, 1,000 years, you'd be completely bound if you have this notion, this big picture. That's a big chunk of something, right? But it does seem times included. So view 3, which we're going to take, and I will mention the other one a little bit, is 1,000 years is a complete amount of time. Complete amount of time. Well, let's read verse 3. And he cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things he must be released for a little while. All right. In Revelation 19, the two beasts, the emperor worship cult, who made Christians worship him, had been dealt with. Satan has not. Here's his turn. He is cast into this bottomless pit. Once again, evil came out of there in Revelation 9. The beast came out of it in 11 and 17. Now Satan has been shut up as evil had been shut up in the vision of Zechariah 5. I want you to listen. This is an interesting passage. In Zechariah, it says, "Here is a lead disc lifted up, and this is a woman sitting in the basket, inside the basket. Then he said, 'This is wickedness.'" So the woman in the basket is called wickedness. "And he thrust her down into the basket and threw the lead cover over its mouth." So it's interesting that this vision in Zechariah is wickedness personified, is thrown in a container and covered, sealed up. It's not punishing Satan. That's coming later. It is limiting his power in some way. It's binding him. Yep. Oh, I believe he did. Yeah, I believe he did. Yeah, I believe the question was, when Satan tempted Jesus, did he really have the power to do those things? I don't think it'd be a temptation unless God actually gave him the ability to offer what he did. And Satan has had tremendous amounts of power at different times. But what we're seeing here, thankfully, is a binding of that power, a limiting of it. Notice, it says, "Set a seal on him." You remember Pilate approved setting a seal on the tomb of Jesus, saying, "Make it secure." Now, was that seal able to stop God from raising Christ? Obviously not. But what about when God sets the seal? It is sure. Is Satan, during this period of whatever it is, going to be able to get out of there? He is not. Now, like I said, that does not mean he is not active. He's limited in some way that we're about to look at. But he certainly, the Bible tells us, is able to be the tempter. He is able to certainly be the roaring lion for individuals.
It is done because now he can tempt it, but he can't make it.
That is correct. Matter of fact, I want you to hold that thought, because we're going to deal with several things in ways he's limited today. But I want you to notice in Revelation, it tells you exactly what it is. Here in verse 3, it says, "He sealed there, seal on him in the pit, so that he should deceive the nations no more." So it tells you what the limiting is here. We see the scope of the binding. Now there are two. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Sure. You know, that is a great point. You know, Satan can only do what God allows him to do. You know, he had to ask for permission to assault Job. He did. He said, just spare his life. Matter of fact, he had to go back and get permission to attack his helper. So I think we understand that Satan, I think sometimes people get the idea that Satan's this superpower and God's a superpower, and that's not how it works. Satan, I do believe he's kicked out of heaven, and I do believe, you know, that was no battle either. I don't know what he was thinking, but that was the end of him, and then he's allowed to do only what God will allow him to do. Remember, at first, he had to go back and ask God again. He said, if you attack his health, he'll curse you. And God said, you can do it, just don't take his life. But before that, he only had the power to attack his goods and his family. Oh, yeah, he does. So, I mean, we know Satan's powerful. But good news is, thanks to our Lord, that there's a binding here, okay? So, view number one is basically Christ's mission bound Satan in many ways, which is all true here, by the way. And then we're going to look at, is that what is being talked about here? But for instance, his death on the cross destroyed the power of sin, which is Satan's number one tool. But with the cross, he made it where we can overcome sin. right? There's no more having to roll it forward with animal sacrifices, no more veiling of the power of it. You know, we can defeat sin with Christ's blood. His No, it's actually from 1 Corinthians 10:13. 1 Corinthians 10:13. Yeah, God will not, he'll provide a way of escape with every temptation. His resurrection destroyed the power of death. The resurrection, sometimes we focus so much on the cross that we skip or look over just kind of, oh, yeah, the great happy ending is resurrection. The resurrection is everything. That was the number one thing the apostles did as proof. But Paul talks in 1 Corinthians 15 that without the resurrection, we are pitiful, basically. I mean, it's everything. He destroyed the power of death. He showed that for us, it's not just about this life, right? Since Christ came, think about this. And I have verses for each one of these in the notes, but we won't turn to them. Satan cannot destroy the word. We are promised that God's word will endure. He cannot destroy the church. The church will endure. And this is what Dad was saying earlier, cannot destroy a Christian without their consent. Cannot destroy a Christian without their consent. So here's a few ways that works. He can't have demons possess people anymore, contrary to some news reports from some foreign country you hear. Separate discussion, but that power's been limited. He cannot tempt us beyond what we can bear. We are promised that he has to, when he gives the temptation, God will make the way of escape. He cannot continue to tempt Christians who resist him on a matter. James 4:7, resist the devil, he will flee from you. He has to. So he's limited. He can't just, whatever this is, if you put up the resistance, God has bound him and said, you know what, you cannot just keep on this person, you got to go. He cannot accuse God's people to God. That's what he did with Job. Back in chapter 12, we saw they threw the accuser down to the earth, and he was furious about it, but he no longer can go to God's throne and say that Lucas did this or that. He cannot take away our salvation. Romans 8. Can't grasp us out of God's hand. He can kill Christians, which is a message these people need, but he cannot touch their souls. For a people here that's heavily persecuted, some to the death, they need to know what he can't do. Okay? So, view 1 in the immediate passage, that wherever the gospel light has shined, Satan cannot deceive the nations. Basically, deceive with sin. Okay? Now, view 2, and this is the one I favor here. I think it fits the context of the book better, and it kind of ties still to the first one we looked at. Satan cannot deceive the nations through Rome anymore. That's the power that these people are dealing with. He would no longer be able to use Rome to deceive these other nations. They have been shown consistently through the book as allies of Rome, right? So they want Rome's favor. And you'd have these client states that agreed to support Rome in exchange to buy in. And would they worship the emperor? Sure they would. Matter of fact, Revelation 18:23 said that the harlot there, Babylon, had deceived them, the nations. Well, while bound, Satan would not be permitted to deceive the nations anymore. Now, we're going to see further down, he would be allowed later on, but it won't be through Rome. It will not be. Think about this. Rome was a unique opportunity for Satan. As an empire that ruled the entire world the church inhabited. So think about it this way. What if the church today was only in the United States? If Satan had just our government turned against the church, passing laws, persecuting, killing Christians, you could see the power that would be, right? Well, this is as far as the church was in the first century. The Roman Empire was huge. Church was growing quickly, right? But Satan had this one window in time where he had this kind of power, where he could deceive the nations to try and destroy the church. Okay? So how would Satan be bound in this view? Well, it's very interesting. We've studied a lot about how Christianity and Christians were persecuted by Rome, but things started to change. Thomas, I seem to have lost power on my slideshow. Constantine I issued the Edict of Milan in AD 313. They tried to stamp Christianity out, but it kept growing. And it got very prominent in the empire. It is believed Constantine converted to Christianity at the end of his life. But in 313, he definitely issued the Edict of Milan that forbid persecuting Christians. Okay? In 380 AD, it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. So it's really crazy. It went from heavily persecuted tiny group that Satan thought he could stamp out to becoming tolerated in the Roman Empire, to even Roman emperors were converting to Christianity, and it became the state religion. Not only that, Rome was still judged for their wickedness. The empire fell in AD 476. So never would there be an opportunity for the Roman Empire to be a tool of Satan again. So in this view, Satan was bound from deceiving the nations through pagan Roman emperors or their empire. Now, either way, either one of those is why I gave you both, is Satan is bound from deceiving the nations completely for a complete period of time. So we could see that when Rome said you can't kill Christians anymore, imagine the peace that brought the church. You don't have to worship in catacombs anymore. You can have buildings above ground. You can actively preach the gospel. There's a time when that was curtailed. You know, Satan had marshaled these forces. So there is this binding of Satan. So I think specifically, this is, notice I said I think, because we're dealing with some tough passages here. We know he's limited. We know what it says, that he couldn't deceive the nations. I think the most reasonable is that the gospel would be freed up from what Rome was doing. Now, I want you to notice what the end of verse 3 says. After these things, he must be released for a little while. There are very few places in Revelation that every commentator you read agrees on, and this is one of them. Why must Satan be released? It is a puzzle beyond puzzles. If it said right here, Satan's bound, and then we jump down here to end of time, he's thrown in a lake of fire, I think we would have a very clear understanding. Great, he's limited, God's saving him up for judgment, and then we cast him in. But then you get this, he must be released for a little while. No one knows. No one knows.
He gave him a sentence so Christianity could grow. So there's still the temptation.
If you couldn't hear that, could it be freedom of choice? And all I'll tell you, brother, is your suggestion is as good as mine. One thing about it, though, we always have it even with limited satanic power. You know, individuals do. And even if a nation was leveled against the church, you do. But the suggestion you just made is one I've heard offered, and it's as reasonable as any I've heard. But also, even if Satan was completely bound in a pit, would we have the ability to sin, even if he wasn't actively walking around tempting us? I think we would. I'm going to offer a couple suggestions for you. There was one. Here's a couple more. I'm not going to tell you why. Only God knows why. Every commentator I've read just has to admit we don't know. And you just have to about leave it there. Here's view number one, or possibility number one. The short while is anywhere in history that Satan attacks the church again, but it will never be as great as the attack by Rome. All right? So as we described, when the church was in its infancy and literally contained within this one empire, Satan being able to use the emperor and his worship system to get him to actively try to destroy the church, that's the biggest threat the church has ever faced in world history, right? And although Satan was completely stopped in regards to the persecution of the beast Emperor Domitian, Satan would not end his work with Rome. He was allowed to work through other evil forces on earth after Rome. So that's possibility number one, what the short while is. Number two, the short while is a period at the end of time when the gospel becomes so dim in the world that Satan again can assault the church. Could it be that this old world could get so ungodly that Satan would have that kind of power again? You wonder sometimes when you see some things, don't you? I mean, you really wonder. You just see some laws passed in this country. This is the land of the free. This is a Christian nation. And some things, there's certainly been people trying to assault the church. Hadn't succeeded yet. Well, God is going to destroy the world, but matter of fact, we're going to get that later in this book. We're going to discuss these ideas further down in Revelation 20, but the short while remains very mysterious. Can I get through that in the time we have remaining? Let me take a look. No. So what we're going to do is end the class here with our introductory thoughts on the binding of Satan. I thought I would get done with Revelation 20 this morning. We got through 3 verses. A lot of it was the groundwork laid, though, and I think we'll get through the rest of it next week, optimistically. But we'll end class there. For those listening at home,